Hello everyone, Peter Canego here. Isn't this a beautiful model of the Franconia? It was restored by my good friend Tom Nicolai, and this is one of the ships that I went to Ukraine to see back in 1997. At the time, Franconia was named FEDOR SHALYAPIN, and her sister ship, the ex-Saxonia, was the Leonid Sobanov. Both of the ships had been laid up for 3 years, and I was granted permission by dear friends to come see these two classic beauties before they vanished. If you haven't already, I highly recommend watching the first part of this video, which tells the history of the 4 ships in the Saxonia class, including the gorgeous Franconia. It also shows you a bit of Odessa, and it tells some of the backstory as to how I got there. I would like to also say, please, at this point in time, call your congressman, get them to support getting aid to Ukraine. They need our help now more than ever.
And of course, that last bit was meant for my fellow Americans. Now on with the show. Finally, and in my esteem rather miraculously, I was standing in a former Soviet shipyard staring up at the flanks of the FEDOR SHALYAPIN, which was built in 1955 as the Cunarder Ivernia and later became the Franconia in 1963. At this point in July of 1997, she had been laid up for the greater part of 3 years and was in the throes of decay, but in my eye, still an object of great beauty. In so many ways, she was a miniature version of her legendary fleet mates, Queen Mary, Caronia, and Queen Elizabeth, sharing the same shipyard origins, John Brown and Company of Clydebank, and many of the same architects and designers. We entered on aft A deck and headed directly to the music salon on Promenade deck, where I was able to don my cameras and get to work. Drab and for the time relatively modern furnishings and warped ceiling panels, either from water leakage or the prevailing humidity, belied this space's once festive and colorful origins as Franconia's Mayflower Room. But aside from the disco ball and faded grandeur, the space was much as originally conceived, with its curved staircase and brass-festooned iron railings, the vision of designer Jean Monroe, who was affectionately known as the Queen of Chintz. I did my best to fully capture the space before the crew led us up to the Hadji Bey Bar, which was originally Franconia's Cactus Club. Meanwhile, my sympathetic hosts, Igor Polishchuk and Mr. Ivanov, did their best to occupy the somewhat restless crew as I filmed.
Hadji Bey. Okay. Hadji Bey Bar.
That was my brief Ukrainian diction lesson from Mr. Ivanov. Hadji Bey was a Turkish fortress in the Gulf of Odessa. The Cactus Club's basic layout, and even the bamboo-fronted bar itself, were exactly as built in 1963, although as in the music salon, the furnishings and soft fittings were from a latter, if still faded, era. Since the early 1960s, This double room has been the ship's main hub and the epicenter of many fond memories.
Дать какой-то курс. Нормальное старшее же есть пассажирское, там, которое,
Ну, в общем, старшие пассажирские пока есть.
Да.
Пока есть.
Да, и все,
А
все.
пассажирские и административные.
From there, we headed down to the starboard enclosed promenade, which in recent years was home to the Arcadia Bar. With its Home Depot-style fixtures, cafe seating, and makeshift tilework, the bar appeared to have functioned as a buffet venue in the ship's final years. Directly forward, the midships vestibule housed a shop on the starboard side, but like almost all of the promenade deck spaces, it was locked up. We continued to the forward vestibule, where I was able to peek in through the windows at the Vladivostok bar, which still had many of the decorative elements, save for the namesake feature, of Jean Monroe's once chic parasol bar. In a curious quirk, the bar's brass arch facing had been flipped. Perhaps it was by accident, or perhaps the arches were too Gothic for someone's taste. The port-side enclosed promenade had been turned into a winter garden when the ship became FEDOR SHALYAPIN. The only room that wasn't locked up here was one of the least interesting, a crew's office that had once been the first-class library and writing room. It takes a lot to kill those hardy asparagus ferns, but those on the aft promenade had long since been reduced to dried tendrils. There was so much yearning to be discovered on promenade deck, but the crew urged us on and up the forward stairs, which had gorgeous maple and macassar ebony veneers. Although I dreaded leaving the prom deck areas so quickly, I liked where those stairs were taking us. That light at the end of our climb was the chart room, with its oak veneers, Bakelite-coated metal drawer handles, and classic instruments. It had changed little since 1955. That cluster of bags on the floor is the camera gear we had to drag around with us in those pre-iPhone days. They'll make cameos throughout this video. Even back in 1997, the teak-floored bridge was a virtual museum of vintage equipment. It's a shame the wheelhouse couldn't have been kept fully intact when the ship was broken up, but I did manage to rescue the key elements and gauges, including the brass Siemens telegraphs and the steering station. While my good hosts visited with the crew out on the wings, I did my best to capture this space from every vantage. There is a glorious view of that tall domed funnel from the starboard wing and the classic Clydebank-built features of her upper decks. It really was remarkable that so little had changed since her glory days with Cunard. The view from Monkey Island was one of creeping decay. Her lengthy foredecks had fallen into disrepair, and adding to the milieu were metal barrels and other detritus. And as for Monkey Island, the deck was warping under thick layers of cracked paint. Meanwhile, her sister in decay, the Leonid Sobanov, beckoned in the distance off her port side. A strong breeze billowed over the weathered upper flanks of the FEDOR as I panned over her open lifeboats.
What I'm saying is, where the...
And here's a pan from the port wing before we headed down and aft.
But I don't want to do that yet. I want to do exteriors.
The next lower level sports deck began with open terraces outside of the officers' accommodations. Heading a few steps aft, this is what was left of the former first-class sunroom, which was added in 1963 and last used as a playroom. That span of full-length aft-facing windows in the sunroom looked out to the former first-class games deck, which had long since been covered in what was then rusted and peeling blue astroturf. Farther aft, sports deck was broken up into several nooks and crannies created by the funnel housing, smaller deck housings, and ventilation units. The lovely teak decking here and throughout the ship was showing its lack of maintenance after 3 years of exposure. Franconia's first class had full run of sports deck, extending all the way aft to a deck games court that was covered in a tent of netting. In the ship's latter years, this space was used for basketball as well as deck tennis. But it was actually tourist class who had the ship's best cruising asset, a gorgeous Lido with a heated kidney-shaped pool that was added in the 1963 refit. The addition of full air conditioning, private facilities in all cabins, and this Lido, which had clearly seen better days, is what made Franconia, and later FEDOR SHALYAPIN, such a successful cruise ship. The terracing, semi-spiral staircases, and tiered glass windscreens here were such handsome architectural additions. An alfresco bar was directly in front of the pool here, On her sister, Leonid Sobanov, the bar was off to the port side. Our hosts, Mr. Ivanov and Igor, reminisced at the pool's edge as we worked our way aft on Promenade deck and then down to the main deck fantail. Yet more sunning space beckoned from aft main deck, another asset that contributed to these ships' successful cruising eras. Linked by a dark athwartship's passage, the interior portion of aft main deck was home to the former tourist-class promenades. These glass-enclosed walkways surrounded a covered space that was especially popular in inclement weather. This was the former 10-Pin Club, a combination jukebox and bowling alley geared for teens. Back out on the fantail, the view forward was one of elegant terraces and curves. There is also an emergency steering station with an original brass telegraph that is now in my dining room. While our host kept the crew occupied by the pool, I had a chance to capture the mooring area on aft A deck. It truly doesn't get more shippy than this. From there I had about 10 minutes in total to race up to boat deck and ultimately the forecastle in pursuit of one of my favorite shots. With its canopy of lifeboats and teak elements, the boat deck itself reminded me of the much larger sun deck one can still enjoy aboard the Queen Mary in Long Beach. I wasted no time in heading forward before the crew intervened. My main challenge was all the architectural features that were begging for their close-up. What a wonderful area this must have been during streamer-festooned departures and on balmy sea days, especially up forward with that view over the bow. To my eye, even with the clutter and decay, it was a magnificent view. The Shalyapin's tall vertical superstructure had sculptural elements that were at once both hardy and fragile-looking. That second level of rectangular windows, in lieu of large portholes on boat deck, are what distinguished this ship from her three sisters. I did manage to climb out to the forecastle for that favorite shot of mine, but the challenge was where to put the cameras, with the sun now beaming onto the Leonid Sobanov, and no time to spare. On my way back, I stopped to capture the crew pool area and some more views of that distinctive face of the FEDOR Shalyapin, with all of its subtle architectural nuances that were singing out to me. And of course, I just had to get up close to that gorgeous John Brown & Company builder's plate. From there, I raced back along the port side to rejoin our hosts and the ship's crew, who were waiting for me.
I think he went up these center stairs here to get up there.
Up there?
Yeah, I think. Queen Mary has these exact same things.
It's upstairs.
Wow. Okay.
Das Fantail Sport Deck.
With this last shot, we've now made a full circle of boat deck. Once reunited, they led us to the aft promenade deck lobby, which was dominated by a portrait of FEDOR SHALYAPIN, the actor and opera singer the ship was named for. With so much of the ship not yet documented, I have to admit my heart sank a bit as we headed down the stairs.
Oh, yes.
Ну, сейчас он сделает.
We made a brief stop at the purser's office on A deck, which I had hoped might be followed by a visit to the dining rooms on restaurant deck, but they were both locked up.
Kevin, flash.
Got it.
Instead, we were led past the entrance to the aft Russia restaurant and back ashore. Our visit had concluded, short and sweet, or maybe bittersweet. Still, I was overjoyed and so grateful for the experience. The next day, our hosts hired a local tug so I could get some exterior footage of the ex-Cunarders, whose bows extended past their respective berths, into the dolphins, as the saying goes. In retrospect, in this post-9/11 world, such an undertaking would likely now be impossible, even if Ukraine were not in the throes of an invasion. Some of the vessels moored near our tug clearly had a rich backstory, if their vintage and condition were any indicators. To have one, let alone two of these ships in view was so overpowering. All of the expense, planning, and worry had paid off. The irony is that during these expeditions, my time was spent behind the lens with little or no time to just take it all in. But now, as I look back on this footage, I can do just that. Despite her fading and dull livery and streaks of rust, the Leonid Sobanov looked positively dashing with the sun beaming on her starboard side. The Shalyapin had a slightly better paint scheme and looked equally resplendent from a near water level perspective. It was easy to imagine her back in Cunard colors, proudly steaming the St. Lawrence. With Mr. Ivanov and Igor translating for me, the tug captain patiently positioned his craft at all of my desired angles and distances. And to think that a mere $50 covered the fuel and the tug captain's fee is inconceivable now. It was probably the best $50 I had ever spent. At this point in time, despite her worsening condition, there was still some hope that the Shalyapin might be refitted for further service. I would have loved to have sailed in her had that come to pass. The tug patiently and steadily cruised along her aft flanks, allowing me to get some footage of that decidedly British cruiser's stern, with its unique anchor, required on the St. Lawrence. Fortunately, this would not be the last footage I would take of this liner. After our short visit, my head was already spinning with plans to return, hopefully when she had a more patient and understanding crew to work with.
Okay, I thought it was on the FEDOR.
Nonetheless, I kept my cameras poised and clicked away. taking full advantage of the perfect conditions and the incredible hospitality I was being shown.
Side is of the
As with Sobanov, the tug rounded Shalyapin's bow and cruised along her starboard side, providing new sunlit vantages. We went far enough to capture both ships together again, but from a different perspective. And then we gradually worked our way back, retracing our wake. Unlike the Shalyapin, there was no hope for the Sobanov to return. Her owners were basically waiting for metal prices to rebound so they could make a decent profit by selling her for scrap. In the meantime, some of her engine parts and machinery were being stripped out for use aboard her one-time sister, the 1957-built Sylvania, which was operating as the popular Albatros for Germany's Phoenix Sea Reisen. Somewhat ironically, the very tug we were on was called Albatros. And here's one last two-shot before we get up close with the Sobanov. Just as he had done with the Shalyapin, the Albatros's captain made a steady approach to the stately, largely forgotten, former Carmania. Of course, I could have kept riding back and forth on that tug all day and then some, but our short voyage was nearing its end. The good thing was, we had another magnificent ship left to explore. The Albatros landed us just a few feet away from the stern of the former Saxonia, later Carmania, and then current Leonid Sobanov. We bid her kind captain farewell and gathered our gear to begin the next chapter in this story, which is coming soon to Midship Cinema. Now, if you love these domed-funneled Cunarders even half as much as I do, I highly recommend Clive Harvey's Saxonia Sisters, an excellent reference during the production of this video.
I referenced this in the video, but you don't actually get to see it. This is the brass steering station telegraph on aft main deck. But you do get to see this one in the video. This is from the bridge of the former Franconia, which was FEDOR Shalyapin. And here's something else you might recognize from the video. This is a strip of the stair tower railing that we walk up to get to the bridge. It even has the Macassar ebony veneer on the top.